to collapse the existing corporate governances corporate governance codes by various regulatory bodies into one harmonized by the Financial Reporting Council, perhaps because had the statutory call it the statutory mandate to be in charge of codes, corporate governance codes in Nigeria. All of the story around the 2013 to 2016 era, and then the suspension and the coming again of the new board to ensure that the NCCG 2018 came up. Of course, we're all meant to drive corporate governance generally, but then the focus was on the private sector. And in the course of time, FROC has also been doing something around public sector governance codes and not-for-profit. But then there is this very special, it's a special sector, it's a unique sector. And of course, in terms of statistics, it's a sector that we felt we could not ignore, and that is the MSMEs. When you're looking at the number, interestingly, this is the second outing for me today talking about MSMEs. We just finished something with LCCI. It's a cluster group that we had to have discussions with on what they intend doing as far as the MSMEs are concerned. So for the NCCG 2018, there are certain languages that it carries. We say it is flexible, it is scalable. But just like I said in the earlier meeting, when you say you are scaling something, of course, scaling it so that it can fit other structures, at a point in time, it will actually lose its value when you have overscaled. And so seeing that the NCCG 2018 could not really attend to, because of its various requirements, it could not attend to the needs of the MSMEs, it became necessary for the Financial Reporting Council to have what we could call a fit-for-purpose code for the MSME sector. That was what drove the FROC, in collaboration with the other two partners that you have mentioned, the Convention for Business Integrity and, of course, UNGC, to come up with a code for the MSMEs that is kind of fit for their own purpose. There are special things that they would, that need to be attended to as far as governance is concerned for the MSMEs. I know most times people think of access to capital, for infrastructure, and all of that as areas of concern, but we thought that if we are looking at an SMSC space where we want organizations there to be existing 40 years, 50, 60 years down the line, governance becomes one, in fact, if not the most critical thing that must be looked at. That is what drove us at the Financial Reporting Council to do something for the MSMEs. And of course, in doing that, we needed to at least do something that is a bit off the conventional corporate governance codes, processes. So we brought people together that could speak to that particular subgroup that is of unique interest to FROC. That's what drove us. Thank you.
Yes, you're actually right, because I hear you. Looking at the statistics, MSMEs make up 96 to 97 of all registered businesses in Nigeria. And then if you also look at the official figures from SMID and NBS survey and international sources, it actually estimates that MSMEs contribute between 48 and 50% of Nigerian GDP. And when you now account for employment in Nigeria, that is actually approximately 84% to 86%. So they're very critical. And so it's very commendable that FRC had to think about the uniqueness and to develop the principle-based corporate governance for guidelines for the SMEs. Now, driving on that point, I'll go to Ayotola. Ayotola, so how were the principles in the SME CGG tailored to reflect the uniqueness and the realities of businesses in Nigeria, especially sole proprietors?
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Zimani. The statistics you rolled out just now are very, very important, because we also understand that there are so many other MSMEs that are not registered. So if you have that number, that percentage, as registered organizations. You can imagine how many are operating in what we call the gray economy, who have not formalized their registration, but actually need to. Because like Mr. Osawe says, what's most important for MSMEs to grow is actually governance. It's so critical to business sustainability, really critical to access to capital, gaining trust with all kinds of different stakeholders. I mean, you'd much rather do business with an organization that is, or with a business that is registered than with one that is not registered. And so, he's talked about the why. I'm going to speak to then the how. We were, like Mr. Osawe said, we're very careful not to use what we call a sledgehammer to kill an ant. Nobody was killing anything anyway, but it was important that in developing these guidelines, and that's what they are, guidelines, we take into account the size of the organizations that we're talking about and how different they are. Now, the fact that they're small in terms of staff strength, perhaps, does not mean that they're not generating millions, in some cases, billions, right, of Naira. But we understand that there are different ways companies or organizations come into being, businesses come into being. And many times it is informally, and at some stage there's an imperative to register. But we wanted these guidelines to be applicable not just to registered MSMEs, although that's very, very important, but also to unregistered MSMEs that were looking for a pathway to formalize their existence. Because after a while, I guess there will be very little hiding places or hiding spaces for businesses who are generating such income. Apart from not hiding, there's also the incentives to actually register properly. And we see in the new tax laws, some incentives to say, look, you can register and not be afraid of being taxed, so long as you don't earn above revenue, you don't earn above 50 million Naira. So in plain terms, the guidelines are a manual that really guides MSMEs on how to run their businesses the right way, regardless, like I said, of the number of staff they have, how big their business is. It really helps businesses build trust, reduce risks as well, and prepare for growth, that next stage. So, the FRC saw that many MSMEs, they struggle not because of poor ideas, but really because of poor structures. And the guidelines give a blueprint so that no matter what your size is, it's a blueprint. Like has been mentioned, they're not compulsory, but MSMEs are encouraged to apply the provisions that are appropriate to their size and complexity. So based on the size category, whether you're a micro enterprise defined by Sweden as being less than 10 members of staff, less than 5 million in assets, you're small, between 10 and 49 members of staff, between 5 and 50 million Naira in assets, or your medium enterprise, which is defined as between 50 to 199 staff strength, and your net assets are between, more than 50, but not less than 500 million. And the key features of the guidelines are really that it has 6 sections, which are set out into 11 principles of corporate governance. The 6 sections, again, are corporate governance policies and procedures. So the guidelines recommend that MSMEs adopt a formal corporate governance framework that outlines clear roles, clear responsibilities for the key stakeholders, including your board, your directors, management, and shareholders. If you have shareholders, sometimes it's mom and pops, it's just you who is the shareholder, a couple of shareholders. And also define procedures for board meetings, decision-making, and performance evaluation. Look, there is no business that does not require funding of some kind. And whether you're getting that funding from friends and family, they want some accountability where you begin to go to microfinance banks to get funding. They're going to insist that there is some formal structure, and they want to be able to understand the decision making. Even where you're applying for grants or you want to participate, there's so many incentives, for instance, out there, depending on the kind of business you have, to access capital. Whether it be through grants specific to particular industries like agriculture, technology, or whether they be focused on women-owned enterprises, creative space. If we belong to WhatsApp groups, we will find that, very regularly you have flyers coming up, being able to, telling you that you can access certain grants or certain funding. You need to have those corporate governance policies and procedures in place as part of the criteria for you to be able to access that. So we also talk in the guidelines, also speak to a board of directors and how MSMEs should establish a formal board of directors with a clear mandate. We suggest what the size of the board can be. It should vary depending on the specific needs and circumstances of the MSME. And in some cases, I know some MSMEs who prefer to have an advisory board as opposed to a formal board of directors where you register your directors at CAC, but you have a board of advisors, an advisory board who can direct, who can guide you, and who probably have experience of the industry that you're in, help you to open doors and also mentor you as maybe new startups in the industry that you want to go into. Another principle talks about the control environment. So it's talking about your accounts, audit, internal controls, risk management. Now I talks about the tax, the new tax acts just now. I mean, you have to be able to show. So the fact that, it says if you earn more than 50 million, you don't have to pay tax, doesn't mean that you don't have to show somehow that actually I'm earning less than 50 million, right? So that when you are approached, and the taxman will approach you, especially if you have a physical place of business. But even if you don't, there's now more scope and a lot of attention being paid to businesses on social media. We'll say, okay, we need to see your books. You need to, if you're registered at CAC, you have to file accounts, right? So what is your revenue? And so even if it's in giving a nil tax return, you have to be able to show that, okay, I am not subject to tax. And so you need those systems of internal controls, audits, and risk management. And what we've done is also help organizations through the guidelines, help businesses to provide the things the basics that you need to have, and list out what those basics are so that you know. And it's not anything that's too complicated either. Sometimes I think when we use these words like internal control, audit, risk management, people think that it's such a, I don't know, it's something that's very complicated, but it actually isn't that complicated. For your business, you can maybe have a fashion business. What are your key risks? As somebody who owns a fashion business, okay, you need access to light, for instance. And so in terms of risk management, you will make sure that if you have a shop, there is steady electricity. Electricity isn't too expensive. That's risk management. You have access to your materials. You are not, you're in an environment where, you can work to whatever time based on, your customers. You're not in a retail market where they shut down at 6. So there are different things that become then important to you. And these are the things to the continuity of your business. And these are the things you want to be able to appropriately manage for the risks that could crystallize. Then we talk about stakeholder relations, being able to identify who your stakeholders are, your customers, your regulators. Even at Alaba market, IFRS are there, any market, they're there knocking on doors saying, okay, come and pay your tax. Local government is there as well. Then we talk about family governance, because we understand that certain businesses are family-owned businesses. And then finally, we talk about ESG considerations, because environment, social, and governance are very important. It's nothing new. Again, these are things that we've always done. We've always cared for our society. We've always focused on the environment, but there are opportunities in focusing on ESG and in incorporating ESG factors into how we do business. And I'm just going to stop there.
Okay. Thank you, Ayotola. You more or less, the second question I was going to ask you was to give, because the essence of this is to demystify corporate governance as it relates to MSMEs. And I wanted you to give practical examples of things that these small businesses can actually adopt to be able to practice and enshrine good corporate governance in their businesses. And you've more or less gone to that. So you've taken care of that, because I want this to be relatable. So, but then I now need to ask you, you've kind of enumerated the value of why businesses should adopt good corporate governance practices. But then there's this issue, there's this concern that governance is costly, it's burdensome. So how would you respond to such concerns? I've not looked at the Q&A, but I'm sure basically most of the questions or concerns would be around that. And what low-cost governance practices low-hanging fruit can they right away implement? Thank you.
Yeah, so for people who say governance is costly, I would say lack of governance is actually more costly. Okay. So when you don't have those structures in place, it becomes more costly. Now, again, you don't have to, go hard from the very beginning. Of course, with certain types of businesses, a startup law firm, you're going to you can start in your living room, but there are just certain things that you're going to have in place to be able to run a good firm that will attract your clients. You can't necessarily say to your clients, although you can do a lot of things remotely online at the moment, but again, your clients have to know that you have the expertise, and they have to know that, if anything goes wrong, they can pursue you. If anything, but they don't even really want things to go wrong in the first place. So you have there's that kind of minimum standard that you need to have, and that you should have, and that people pay money on the look, the effigy, but we're saying pay a bit more attention to the nuts and bolts beyond the look. So I would say, first of all, what can you do? Start small and then grow very smartly. Start with the basics. Document your key decisions. First of all, register, then document your key decisions. I'm talking about having board meetings and keeping your minutes. Keep consistent records, track your revenue and expenses. Very, very important, because how then do you know that this business is profitable? And especially when you're going to generate income, either through banks or you're raising capital in the form of equity or partnerships, how are you going to show that if you haven't been tracking your revenue and expenses from day one? And then create policies that are simple and easy to understand. Now, of course, we've got AI that will help you churn out some policies. And if you feed a prompt to ChatGPT, I am a small legal firm or law startup, and I would like, what are the key policies I should have? And it will generate that for you, specific to the size of your business. However, you then need to take whatever has been generated by ChatGPT and make sure it makes sense to your business, that you understand it and that you can defend it. So that's really key. It's much easier now to generate your policies. You don't have to go to somebody to write those policies for you, and you don't have to maybe create the time to write those policies for yourself. But certainly you should be able to review your policies, and you should be able to not just review them, but also ensure that they speak to your business and they make sense for your business. One more thing, policies on staff behavior and staff conduct and how you treat your staff is very, very important. We've had some startups that have gotten themselves into a lot of trouble because they haven't treated their staff well. I was reading a case recently about a gentleman who actually won his case. It was on LinkedIn. And I think the lawyer who defended the case spoke to how her client was able to get his remedies. I think 8 out of the 10 reliefs that he went to with the court, or prayers he went to with the court, were granted, because during his probation period, the company changed his terms, changed the job title. He was supposed to be Chief Happiness Officer, HR role, and they changed it halfway through his probation period, and then wanted to change his terms, slash his salary by half. And obviously he got damages. He did get damages. Now, other common tools that you can use, like I talked about, simple Excel spreadsheet for basic budgeting. You don't have to go and get Sage. Google Drive. So again, like I said, just start small. Do what is proportional to your size and stage and improve over time. Then set up a small trusted board. Like I said, if you can't afford a large board of directors, or you don't even have to be able to, a small board of directors, doesn't have to be large or expensive. You should have generated enough goodwill to be able to go to some seniors, or have the character, a good character, to be able to go to some people you know who you can trust for advice, business professional advice, to help you with oversight, to help with advice, to help you with advice. You know, one of the things I've found with some, and I'm not even talking about Gen Zs, I'm talking about millennials, is this attitude that, oh, they know it all and they don't need to listen to advice from people. And they may come to you and say, oh, I want to do this, I'm thinking of doing this. But it's really more for you to say, oh, really well done. It's not for them to submit to you their business plans and to be able to say, well, how can you advise me? There are lots of people willing to pay back or pay forward and to help. And so use trusted professionals. Look for the retirees who want something to do. Ask them to please help you on your board. You may not be able to pay them, but perhaps you should think about giving them some profit share. So for the amount of time they're going to spend with you or on your board issues. The guidelines encourage board effectiveness and flexibility as well. Define roles as well. That's what I would say. It's very important to state who is responsible for what in your business. So these are some other things that don't cost money, but when you do it, it actually saves you a lot of trouble. It prevents overlap, it prevents confusion. Having things like job descriptions helps you to define, what do I want this person to do? And who do I need within my organization? It may be that I don't need a chief marketing officer at this stage, but it may be that you need a head of sales, you know? And so being able to sit down, and all of those things do not, documenting roles, highlighting tasks, they don't take a lot of money. Sit down with your team, however small they are, outline the key areas of your business, operations, financing, marketing, compliance, customer service, and assign somebody who will be responsible for each area, even if it's this, like one person is handling like 4 things at the start, you know, because you don't have that volume. And then please, please, please prepare for continuity and emergencies. The reason why many early stage businesses flounder, I should say, is because they do not prepare for continuity. They don't prepare for emergencies. And in Nigeria, there are so many Black Swan events just waiting to happen, many curveballs coming your way. So that you have to build resilience over time. And that's another thing. Corporate governance allows you to build that resilience. Good governance allows you to build that resilience. And it means that the business can continue running, even if the main decision maker is not present, is absent for some space of time. My goddaughter is getting married. So we've been doing the whole Ashwebi thing and all of that. And I've been responsible for handling all of that. Now, I remember this particular business that does Ashwebi. They'll remain nameless for now. And I had gone to them in the past, excellent. And then for some reason, the owner of the business is not around. Maybe they've jackpot or something, or they're operating from overseas for a period of time. And suddenly everything is going wrong. Why? Because different time zones. So I don't want to go somewhere and you can't make a decision because Madam has not woken up and she's in a different time zone and you're waiting. There are certain processes that should be in place that, you know, staff should be able to make decisions in your absence, because God forbid that you're not on the scene for like 3 months, and there should be succession planning. And then you should put yourself in an investor readiness position. There is nothing better than good corporate governance in helping to attract funding. It's not about who you know anymore. There's no free cash anywhere. Somebody's going to look at your business model, but more than that, I have friends who own VCs. They want to see your governance. They're interested in your level of governance. They're interested to know whether you have a board or you're a sole decision maker. I hope you have not lost me. And I'm going to stop there, Ezimani. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayotola. I also like that you highlighted how SMEs can leverage technology to improve their governance and compliance processes. Thank you so much for that. It was very insightful. So, Mr. Sawe, my question now, I'm coming to you right now to ask. So, you know, earlier on in my opening remark, I had talked about the tax reform 2025 and CAMA 2020 as well. Now, and we have the FRC SME guidelines. So how does compliance with the FRC SME, because I know a lot of people would like to know, how does the FRC SME guidelines, how would that position MSMEs to benefit from the provisions of CAMA 2020, as well as the tax reforms 2025?
All right, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Noruka. I think listening to Ayotola is very clear. I mean, one thing is certain, which of course, let me do what they call a disclosure now. It's clear that she was part of the SME CGG, as we'll call it, as Small and Medium Enterprises Corporate Governance Guideline, for short, SME CGG. And that's why the detail that she gives, that she gave already spoke to that. And in the course of her answering the question before now, the earlier question, she actually delved into this very one that you have asked me, the issue of the provisions of CAMA and then the Tax Reforms Act. Then, of course, how do we situate SME corporate governance guideline in all of this? Now, yes, there is this issue of cost to governance. And that has become perhaps one of the areas that people are a bit conscious of and they are afraid. But of course, like they would always ask, they say, go and try ignorance and see whether it's not more expensive. And that is why right away, the first thing that I will perhaps put across as an advice would be that the cost of governance, especially at the initial stage, because each time we're talking of governance, we're talking of structures being put in place. Let's see that more as an additional investment in the entity and in the organization that you are in, rather than a cost. Because at the end of the day, if these structures are not in place, then of course you have actually denied yourself of several other benefits that follow. And that's why we said it's not really the issue of access to capital, the issue of infrastructure not being there and information and all that. It is that you have governance structure in place and then others will naturally come in. And then how do we now situate it with the CAMA expectations? I know there is this provision in CAMA that talked about small entities not even having to do, I'm trying to use an example, not having to do an audit. But I want to believe that if we are going to talk of an organization that would assess capital eventually, I'm sure those that you are going to meet will be interested in what do you have on ground? What are your, what's your performance like? And you can only do that when you have deliberately put in place, attended to the issues of your internal controls, things around your revenue, things around your overheads and all of that, and you're able to at least submit a financial statement by whatever name. If you don't do that, then of course, the idea of you having to access capital in any way is already being threatened. And so, yes, there are provisions of CAMA. If you need to file in, say, do the normal annual returns for CAC, as it were, you have to do it through a document. And that document is something that you ordinarily would have deliberately put in place through a governance structure that you are supposed to have instituted in your organization. Same thing with the issue of the tax reform. Just like Ayotola already said, yes, there are certain brackets that perhaps you would say they are like tax exempt, but you are not just going to verbalize it that for an organization, I'm not expected to pay tax. The only way you can prove that is to submit something that can now be used by, call it the regulator, in this case, Federal Internal Revenue Service, or the State Internal Revenue Services, to actually confirm that you belong to that bracket that is not expected to, say, pay tax or pay a certain range of tax. So each time we are talking about governance, it is that you should have something on ground that can now be used to access your organization. Trust is built over time because you now have something that maybe third parties, maybe external organizations that are interested in you can readily refer to. That is more like the hidden benefit that, of course, organizations stand to gain when this issue of having governance instituted. Like we always say, we want it to be like in our DNA, let it become a culture within that organization that, look, this is the way we do things. We're talking about succession plans. We're talking about policies that will give an indication that, look, in the next couple of years, this organization will still be in existence. And so, yes, compliance with SME, corporate governance guideline, of course, for entities that have deliberately taken it as not just a nice to have, as something that they must institute. I'm sure we know that they would then stand to benefit. They have more gains than those who would have just taken it for granted. I think that would be my direct response to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Osawe. You and Ayotola, you've done a fantastic job highlighting the benefits and the value of one complying with the FRC SME guidelines. Now, the further question that I would like to ask you, what about, would there be any form of certification for SMEs that comply with the FRC SME guidelines? In addition to all the benefits and the value that you've listed, would there be any form of certifications, formal recognition or certifications for them?
Okay. Well, let me, when you say something is principles based, of course, that's like a general thing. We know we don't want to go rule based, but even in being principles based, there is this issue of whether it is mandatory or whether it is voluntary. Now, for all of the things that Financial Reporting Council ordinarily will come up with, there's always somehow the element of it being mandatory. And of course, that can speak to the NCCG 2018. For those who fall into the category of PIEs, I mean, let me put that group together. You can say it is mandatory for them to comply with the provision, the requirements of the NCCG 2018. But when we are talking of the SME, it's actually another bucket, and it's an environment where you need to be a bit careful. And that is why even in the CG, the SME CGG, it is said to be voluntary. But you see, being voluntary does not also leave it at loose ends. And that is why one of the key things, first of all, for FROC, we see issues around SME as developmental. We want to see how we can support the SME group, at least to become the giants of tomorrow. Of course, when they become real big, they can subject themselves to the bigger regulations around the big boys and the big girls. But the first thing is developmental. But then you don't also want to just leave it, open-ended. And that is why there are incentives that you want to bring into it so that you can become not just a nice to have, but something that you could say is now more like a survivor thing or an existential thing. Part of what is being worked around it is to, yes, bring in the issue of certification for a reason. Let me just give a quick example. At least we have Ms. Jago online from Oando. I'm sure that is not, I'm sure I've not exceeded anything as disclosure. And Oando Group, for instance, there are several SMEs that want to have a relationship with Oando, being, I mean, a big entity out there. And MTN, for instance, there are several SME organizations that want to have business to do with them. But then what gives Oando, what gives an MTN the confidence to deal with such large corporates? It could just be that they take it as one of their requirements that, okay, for us to deal with you and see you as a serious-minded SME, you need to at least show us that you have structures. And one of the things that will give us that guarantee is that there is, quote and unquote, an FROC that has said you actually have it. And that is where the issue of certification comes in. That is the kind of thing that we have in mind, which, like I said, I was in an earlier meeting today, that we have started working with cluster groups. The LCCI, for instance, has taken it as they have, told members of the LCCI to adopt the SME CGG as a governance code for themselves. I mean, as a body. We didn't force it on them, but they saw it as something that they needed to drive, and they have taken it in. But beyond that, the issue of certification is part of what we are building in to say, okay, let this now become something that gives additional, in fact, my CEO, my executive secretary called it competitive advantage. So if you are certified, it would mean if you have a certification and your entity has that, you should have some kind of advantage when you are dealing with, say, for instance, the large corporates. So yes, there is some bit of things around certification so that it becomes an additional benefit for the SMEs that that adopt the SME CGG. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sawe. There's a lot of questions to ask, but I want to make this very engaging, and I want people to relate to all the things, unpack everything that you and Ayotola you've shared. So I'm going to now hand over to Tolu so we can take questions. We have about 14 minutes left. This is an 1 hour program, and I know there are lots of questions. So I will hand this over to Tolu to moderate the question, the Q&A. Tolu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Osawe, for the opening remarks and for giving us a background on the excellent work that you, Ms. Jagon, and other collaborators have done on the governance of MSMEs in Nigeria. And Ms. Jagon, it's always a delight to listen to you speak on corporate governance. So thank you, ma'am, for the insights that you've shared. Some remarkable points you touched on during your session. You said medium-sized and small businesses struggle, not because of poor ideas, but poor structures. Then you led us into some practical examples of what the structures could look like, from documenting your decisions, establishing policies that govern how you do what you do as a business, to, of course, setting up a small trusted board. You also gave us good advice on the importance of treating your staff well, and you emphasized the fact that we must prepare for continuity and succession planning. You ended one of your questions by giving MSMEs a profound reason to embrace good governance. You said there is nothing better than good governance to attract funding. Mr. Osawe, thank you for your responses as well. You emphasize trust and its role in corporate governance. And I also heard you doubling down on succession planning and the establishment of policies. So at this point, I'll be moving into the Q&A session where we welcome our participants to send in their questions so our distinguished panelists can help address. For now, I can see about 3 questions, and I have the first question, which I will direct to Ms. Ayotola Jagun. So the question is, what tools can the company secretary leverage on in order to achieve effective delivery of responsibility in this regard?
So I'm assuming that you're saying, okay, you're the company secretary of an SME, and how can you strengthen governance in your SME? So first of all, I will start off by saying, look at the code, because the code is actually quite practical. I have placed the link to the code on the group. And if you look at the code itself, it really is very helpful in terms of laying out some of the things that need to be done in each of the sections. So I'll give you an example. It has what it calls the principles and then the recommended practices. Let's take, for instance, principle 1, which is about adopting a formal corporate governance framework, outlining the roles of the key stakeholders, such as partners, shareholders, board of directors, and management, right? The recommended practices, 1.1 then says, partners and shareholders' rights and obligations should be clearly set out and documented. So whether you're going to have a shareholder agreement, but your share structure and ownership should be disclosed, including voting rights and other rights attaching to each class of shares. Now, you can understand as lawyers how this is very, very key, because we don't want a situation where you start off, everything is fine, you're not making money, then suddenly you make money, you haven't documented shareholders' rights and obligations, and then all of a sudden there are issues because now things are looking good, right? 1.2 talks about delegation of authority. Delegation of authority should be formalized in writing, defining the role of the management and specifying matters that are reserved for shareholders and the board of directors. These are CAMA principles. But again, this doesn't have to be anything, like I said, complicated. Just say, okay, these are the members of staff. This is the CEO, MD. If it's a partnership, for instance, who's going to be the managing partner? Because I have had people ask questions of, can a law startup be qualified as an MSME or an SME? Of course, it's based on your turnover, right? And so, like I said, it's a case of taking the principles and making it fit for purpose for your size. 1.2.1 talks about how the MSME should determine the decisions that require approval from partners, especially when your partners or your shareholders are not involved in your day-to-day. You can set parameters such as financial thresholds. All of these things are good governance. All of these things are about good governance. Principle 2 talks about creating a succession plan. These are things that the company secretary should make sure is in place. And where you need help, get help from senior colleagues, get help from the internet. Google is your friend, but wherever you get help from, make sure that you as company secretary are responsible for reviewing it and making sure that it's fit for purpose for your type of organization, for the stage that the organization is in as well. I hope that's helped.
Thank you, Ms. Jagun. That was very helpful. So quickly moving on to the second question, which I'll be directing to Mr. Osawe. And this question is about advisory boards. It goes, in the startup world, it's quite fashionable to have an advisory board made up of mentors and angel investors. Does the SME CCG, Corporate Governance Code, cover this? Go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you for that question. I would say yes, but then that depends on whether the entity you are talking about is then an SME. But in terms of constitution of the board, you are just looking for the best people that can give you value. And I think in terms of the choice, one would expect that for startups, I mean, there's a major promoter. I may not use the right terms, I'm not a lawyer, but then there's a major promoter. And then in doing that, you will be looking for those that can give value to that organization that you are talking about. There are different kinds of startups. Those startups can actually be a startup that is that fits into SME right from the beginning. But you could also have startups that are even from their start, they're already mirroring large corporates. So yes, in terms of composition of the board, I'm sure you can go for the best people that can give value to your organization. That would be the way to respond to that from my side. Thank you.
If I may add, principle 3 talks about the need for a board, and principle 3.1 actually talks about smaller entities may wish to set up an advisory board. But at the stage where you are no longer small, a formal board of directors should be established, and it gives examples. The guidelines give examples of why you would want to set up a formal board.
Thank you, Ms. Jagun. Thank you, Mr. Osawe, for the profound responses. I have just 2 more questions to go here. So I'm directing the first one to Ms. Jagun. So someone had asked in the chat, if the MSME uses ChatGPT to generate policies, will the policies truly reflect the MSME? So if you could please just talk around that. Thank you.
Yeah, you see, that's why it's called artificial intelligence. These things are very intelligent. And again, it depends on the prompts and what you feed into as your prompts. You can be specific as to the type of company you are, the industry you're in, the jurisdiction you're in, and it will come up with something that is pretty close. But like I said, the ultimate responsibility is on you to determine that you've reviewed it and it matches my organization. It is where I ought to be. There should be some aspirational aspects, right, to your policies. It's not that, okay, it's something that I can comfortably do. There should be some growth, some stretch with your policies. It will give you what best practice is. And then you say, this is where I want to go. But you know, you're the one who is assessing yourself as to whether you feel that it is fit for purpose for your industry, it's fit for purpose for you as an organization. So just start off having those things, make sure that there's some stretch, some aspiration in the policies that you're growing towards. And when you get there, then you push further. So there's no point in saying, oh, you're going to have a board of 12 people and you're just a small company. You would say, okay, a board of 3 people. And, you know, you give yourself time. So when it comes to your board charter as well, there's no point in having all these very stringent conditions in your board charter. But as a basic, there should be managing conflicts of interest, should be there. You won't have any provisions on insider trading because really you're not listed. But do you understand what I'm saying? So you just make it fit for purpose. Whatever you get from the net, whatever you even get from a colleague, right? Because some people, they just go online and they download, you know, they can go onto Seplat's website, go into Owando's website. All our policies are there, our key policies. You can't just download it and make it applicable to your company. You have to obviously make sure that it's fit for purpose. And it's also fit for purpose in terms of the industry you're in.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jagun, for that response. We have a lot of questions, but we don't have enough time. So, Madam Chair, can we take one more question?
But the question will be directed at Ayotola because Mr. Osawe had to log off to join.
No worries.
So we can just take one more question, then we can wrap it up.
Okay. So, Ms. Jagun, we have a question and it goes, what strategies can MSMEs use to compete with larger businesses?
Strategies to compete with larger businesses. So the thing is this, you have to make yourself look attractive, right? To whoever it is that you're vying for. So who is the client, or who is the not just the client, but who is also the customer base that you're vying for, that your competitor obviously has control over. You have to be able to differentiate yourself in some way. I can assure you that having the right governance structure is something that's going to be attractive to any client, unless you're into some shady business. But we're not into shady business. So having right governance and being able to actually show that you have it. So sometimes it's also in how you market yourself. And, you know, marketing is very important. In this day of social media, we have to be careful that we don't over-market ourselves. And what I mean is, you know, we use all the right words, but there's no substance. You know, you have to be able to show practical examples. So the young lady who runs her law firm, who posted a case that's now finished, so it's in the official, it's now records of court, and posted her win with her client, is obviously marketing herself as being a good litigator, right? And who's been able to win a case for her client. She's also done it sensitively because she's not breached any confidential information. Yes, she mentioned the name of the parties, but it's records of court, right? So she could. And so being able to speak to what you do, but what you do well, is one way that you will then be able to compete. Also, showing yourself to be a subject matter expert. So in whatever it is you're doing, and I always tell this to my team members, choose an area where you will be the go-to person. So within our team, we have someone who is the sanctions expert. Not only has she learned about sanctions, she has done courses on sanctions. She updates her knowledge every day on sanctions. Yeah, she also does other governance things, transactions, everything else, but she is our sanctions specialist. And so what is it that you can use to differentiate yourself as an add-on, even where you have larger firms that you think have all the clients and the best clients? You just need to put your best foot forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jago. Thank you for those profound responses. At this point, I'll hand back over to the chairman. Madam Chair, you have the mic.
Okay. There's one question here that I can see. I'll just quickly take that. Someone is asking, how do you start off a career path in corporate governance as a new lawyer? I would just suggest that you look into certifications from ISAN, Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administration. Also look at Society for Corporate Governance. Just you can start from there, and as well as read up articles on that, and look for mentors that are already in that field as well. That would be very helpful. So thank you. We actually have loads and loads of questions here because this is a very important conversation, but unfortunately we're out of time, and I'm a stickler for time. We said this was going to be between 3 to 4 and it's already past 4. So at this juncture, I would call on one of the executives of the NBA-SBL, Mr. Adeleke Alex Adibe, to just give us a closing remark. And other questions, I think people can actually, we have a WhatsApp group as well. And if there are members of the NBA-SBL, they can send their questions to the NBA Corporate Governance WhatsApp group, and we can take those questions. We can respond to those questions accordingly because there's really no time. Thank you so much. Mr. Alex, Mr. Adeleke, over to you. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Council of the Section, we thank for an amazing job. At some point, Endurance mentioned that, Rex mentioned we had over 500 people. I think that's phenomenal. And I must say that that's a lot of work right there. I use the opportunity to say to the panelists, and also to say a big thank you to everyone who's putting hard work into this, and all the committee members, and for everyone that has joined. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you so much, Adeleke. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, participants. Thank you, my committee members. Thank you, Ayotola. Mr. Sawe has logged off, but
thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, amazing, the participants. Thank you so much. Without you, this would not have been possible. And then seeing the number of people that have logged on, I think at some point, they had to now open up the, is it YouTube? For them to participate in this. We may have to have another conversation, maybe series 2, around this conversation as well, because we can see that this is very important. Thank you also so much. Ayotola says we'll talk. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And it's bye from all of us. Thank you.
Bye.